Ever feel like, I don't know about you, but I sometimes feel like I'm just drowning in information. Articles, reports, that stack of books on my nightstand that never seems to shrink, you know what I mean?
Oh, I hear you. It's like information overload is the norm these days.
It really is. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, I think. Because today we're talking about making learning stick. And we're getting some unexpected help from, wait for it, the U.S. Navy.
You got it. The Navy. They have this, well, it's a handbook actually, called Practical Applications of Learning Science. And let me tell you, it is packed with research-backed techniques. Techniques that have been battle-tested, you could say, to make learning stick, even when you're under pressure.
Which, let's face it, who isn't these days? But it's funny, right? When you think learning science, the Navy isn't exactly the first thing that springs to mind, is it?
Maybe not, but it makes perfect sense when you think about it. Sailors have to master incredibly complex skills, often really quickly, and they have to be accurate under intense pressure. So who better to crack the code on effective learning?
Totally. And they jump right in with a principle that really challenges the way a lot of us were taught. It's called retrieval practice.
Oh, retrieval practice. It's a game changer, right?
Yeah. Instead of just passively rereading notes or a textbook, like we've all done a million times, this is about actively flexing those memory muscles. It's like taking your memory to the gym.
That's a great analogy. It's about actively trying to recall information, and the research behind it is rock solid. There was this one study, really fascinating, where students who use retrieval practice, quizzing themselves, teaching the material to someone else, they actually outperformed those who just restudied by a significant margin on a test 2 weeks later, like a whopping 68% better.
Wow, 68%. Okay, that's impressive. So ditch the highlighter, I guess, and break out the flashcards?
Flashcards can be good, yeah, but the key is using them the right way. It's not just about looking at the answer. It's about forcing your brain to actually try to retrieve that information from memory before you flip the card over. You've got to make it work for it.
Make it work. I love that. And the Navy, they take it even further. This is brilliant. They actually recommend starting lessons with a student-led review.
Oh, I love that. It's
Yeah.
amazing for building confidence.
Right. And not just for the student who's leading the review, but for everyone in the class who has to actively recall the information. It creates this whole culture of active learning right from the get-go.
It's setting the tone for the whole learning experience.
Exactly. Okay, so that's retrieval practice. Next up, and this one was a big one for me, is spaced practice. Basically the opposite of cramming. And let's be real, we've all been there.
Oh, yeah. The all-nighter before the big exam.
Yeah,
Been there, done that. Not fun.
the worst. But imagine this. Instead of that, you spend, say, 15 minutes a day, every day, just quickly reviewing your notes. Sounds almost too easy, right?
It does, but trust me, the science is there. Cramming might get you through that immediate test or presentation, but for the long haul, it just doesn't cut it. The Navy knows this, and they've got the research to back it up.
So what's the magic behind spaced practice?
Well, when you space out those study sessions, even if they're short, it gives your brain a chance to actually consolidate the information more effectively.
It's like giving your brain time to breathe and absorb everything, right?
Exactly. And the Navy handbook, they even suggest weaving in questions from previous lessons into your review sessions. It's brilliant.
Oh, wow. That's next level. It's like you're constantly building on what you've already learned and strengthening those connections.
Precisely. Each time you revisit that information, those neural pathways get reinforced, which makes it way easier to recall down the line. And that actually leads us nicely to another technique the Navy's really big on. It's called interleaving.
Interleaving. Okay. Tell me more about that.
So interleaving is all about mixing up your practice. Instead of, like tackling things in blocks, like all the multiplication problems, then all the division problems.
Right, right.
You mix them up, you do some multiplication, then some division, then maybe throw in a fraction problem just to keep your brain on its toes.
Okay. I like it. It's like cross-training for your brain. Like you wouldn't go to the gym and just work out one muscle group, right?
Exactly. Interleaving is the same idea. It challenges your brain to switch between different concepts, which actually strengthens those neural connections even further.
It's like you're working smarter, not harder. Love it.
Right. And get this, the handbook. They actually point out that a lot of textbooks, they don't do this enough.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, they kind of guide you through topics in these nice, neat blocks. But that's not always the best way to learn. The good news is they give you the tools to create your own interleaved practice sets.
That's really cool. Okay, so we've got retrieval practice, spaced practice, interleaving. What's next on the Navy's learning hit list?
All right, this one's all about using both visual and verbal cues to really make learning stick. It's called dual coding.
Dual coding. Okay, so like words and pictures.
You got it. Because, let's be honest, who wants to learn from just dry text all the time? It's boring.
Right.
The Navy gets it. They understand that our brains, they process information through these two main channels, what we see and what we hear.
Makes sense.
And when we engage both channels, it creates this, like, richer, more memorable learning experience. It's like giving your brain a 1-2 punch of information.
I like that analogy. So it's not just about reading about something, it's about seeing it, hearing it, experiencing it in multiple ways.
Exactly. So let's say you're trying to learn about, I don't know, the parts of a cell.
Okay, good example.
Don't just read about it in a textbook. Look at diagrams, watch animations, maybe even build a 3D model of a cell if you're feeling really ambitious.
I love that. Get hands-on with it. And the handbook emphasizes that this isn't just for, those who learn best visually. It benefits everyone, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Engaging those visual processing centers along with the verbal ones, it's like it supercharges memory and recall for everyone.
So we're working smarter, not harder, by using both channels.
Exactly. And speaking of making things stick, the Navy has a really clever strategy for those abstract concepts that can sometimes be a bit tricky to grasp. It's called concrete examples.
Concrete examples. Okay. Because I think we've all been there where you're reading something and you're just like, what does that even mean? It's like a foreign language.
Right, like you're lost in a sea of jargon. But the thing is, when you can ground those abstract ideas in real-world examples, suddenly they click.
Yes. It's like, oh, that's what they're talking about.
Exactly. And the handbook, they make a great point about using multiple examples, each one kind of illustrating the concept in a slightly different way.
Oh, that's smart.
It's really important because it helps you to avoid limiting your understanding to just one specific context.
This one really resonated with me because it's so true. It's not enough to just memorize definitions. You need to actually connect those concepts to real-life experiences.
100%. Like, instead of just trying to memorize the definition of, let's say, buoyancy.
Okay, yeah, buoyancy.
Think about what actually happens when you try to push a beach ball underwater.
It's fighting back.
It is. And that concrete experience, it makes this abstract concept of buoyancy so much easier to grasp and, more importantly, to remember.
Right, because you have that sensory experience to link it to. It's not just words on a page anymore. Okay, so that's concrete examples. What's the final principle we're diving into today?
So it's about going beyond just passively absorbing information, right? It's about really digging in and making it your own.
Yes, exactly. It's about asking those how and why questions, almost like you're a detective trying to crack a case.
I love that. Channel your inner Sherlock Holmes.
Exactly. So you read something and you ask yourself, okay, how does this new information connect to what I learned last week? Or why is this piece of the puzzle important in the grand scheme of things?
And don't forget those analogies. Sometimes comparing something new to something you already understand can make all the difference.
It really can. It's like you're building a bridge between the known and the unknown, making those connections in your brain. Right, you're giving that new information a place to hook onto.
Exactly. And you know what else the Navy recommends for really solidifying knowledge? Teaching. Try explaining what you're learning to someone else.
It's true. There's nothing like having to teach something to make you really understand it.
It's like the ultimate test. If you can explain it clearly and simply, you know you've got it down.
Plus, you might even learn something new yourself in the process of explaining it.
Absolutely. Now, thinking about all these techniques, we've talked about retrieval practice, space practice, interleaving, dual coding, concrete examples, elaboration. They might seem like they make learning a bit tougher, at least at first, right?
Now that you mention it, yeah. It's definitely more effort than just passively reading a textbook or watching a video.
Right. And that's where this really intriguing idea from the Navy comes in. It's called desirable difficulties.
Desirable difficulties. Okay. Sounds a little counterintuitive.
It does. Right. But the basic idea is that when it comes to learning, easier isn't always better. In fact, sometimes a bit of a struggle can actually help us understand and remember things better in the long run.
So those moments where we're really wrestling with a concept, trying to wrap our heads around it, those are actually making our brains stronger.
Exactly. Think about it this way. When you have to put in the effort, when you have to problem solve your way through something, you're much more likely to remember the solution.
It's like that aha moment when you finally figure out a tough puzzle. You remember that feeling of satisfaction, that sense of accomplishment?
Yes. And those desirable difficulties, they actually strengthen the neural pathways in our brains that are associated with that information, making it less likely we'll forget it.
So it's like we're building resilience in our learning, making this connection stronger.
Exactly. There's even been research showing that students who learn under conditions of desirable difficulty, like using spaced practice or interleaving, they might actually perform worse on immediate tests. But guess what? They end up remembering the information better long term and can apply it more effectively in new situations.
So it's about playing the long game when it comes to learning. That's so interesting.
It really is. And it has big implications for how we think about education, training, even just personal growth. Instead of shying away from challenges, what if we embrace them as opportunities to deepen our learning and really make it stick?
It's a real mindset shift. So there you have it, learning secrets from the U.S. Navy. Who knew they were sitting on such a treasure trove of learning wisdom?
Right. Their handbook is full of these evidence-based techniques that we can all benefit from no matter what we're trying to learn.
I love how this deep dive has really driven home the point that we are active participants in our own learning. It's not just about passively absorbing information, it's about engaging with it, challenging ourselves, making connections, and yes, even embracing those desirable difficulties along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We have so much more control over our learning than we often realize. And when we embrace that, when we take charge and apply these principles, it's amazing what we can achieve.
So true. The next time you're feeling that information overload, just remember the U.S. Navy and those desirable difficulties. Their insights might just transform the way you learn.